And we're back with the Coverager podcast. I have two guests with me that we're going to be talking about long-term care insurance and how technology and innovation is affecting that area, and of course, which is the topic of the day, how their technology and how their business solution how it's being affected by the current pandemic crisis and what they're doing about it. So my guests this week are Christina Newbrow and Dr. Shar Hu. Shar is the founder and CEO, and Christina is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Helper Bees. To both of you, good afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so let's kick it right off. We're going to be talking about long-term care, but let's let, as you said, Shar, you like to be succinct before we hit record. Let's jump right into the Helper Bees and give an elevator pitch for what the Helper Bees is and what do you do?
Yep, so we are a non-traditional name for a B2B company, especially one that plays in insurance. So at our core, what we do is we help some of the world's largest insurance companies reduce their costs associated with home care. So it's a big goal, but what we try to do is drive data-driven insights through a variety of both technology and services to drive those substantial cost reductions. And as you mentioned, we're in long-term care, which cost reductions are a significant issue, especially given the current interest rate climate.
Yeah. Just as a FYI, for my sake, does it just have to be long-term care?
No, that's what's interesting about what we do. Long-term care was the first market that we entered. We, as a company, have a lot of background in delivering long-term care as service providers. But recently, Christina and I have started making headway before the pandemic, at least, into other forms of insurance that reimburse for home care. So the immediate traction was in workers' compensation, but we have some interest as well in disability insurance, both short-term and long-term. Anybody who pays for home care. That's our arena.
Yeah. So a question I'll kind of throw to both of you. My guess is that, like a lot of areas in the healthcare sphere, home healthcare has probably either had a price curve that's exceeded the general rate of inflation. Can you talk about that? Like where before you came on the scene, where has the price trend been going?
Yeah, overall, you see home care in general starting to creep up. Typically, though, the rate of growth was less than what you would see in an institutionalized setting. And so, although you're starting to see some increases in the high single digits, institutionalized settings, so the advent of the assisted living facility, for instance, over the last decade, and how that's become more and more popular, you start to see institutions like that grow significantly, double-digit growth in cost, which makes home care, because it comparatively had a lower rate of growth, much more attractive from a financial perspective. But it's one of those rare opportunities where I do think claimant and carrier goals are completely aligned, because the claimant wants to stay at home. So the alternative to that would be to go to one of these institutions, and 90% of us, to no surprise, want to remain at home. But from a price perspective, it has scaled a little bit when it comes to either inflation or just wage pressures. But over the last 10 years of me being in the industry, I haven't seen a significant growth rate on the cost of the service like I have seen in institutions.
Yeah, to be honest, that's a little bit where even the Helper Bees and our service offering comes into play. Initially, I think one of the biggest sort of drivers in the home care market and what carriers were used to reimbursing for is traditional agency care, and there's a lot of variability in cost as well as quality. And so with our kind of caregiving model, which is one of our service offerings, and we may talk about that later, but we actually help control both for that cost and quality by providing both higher wages to caregivers as well as offsetting that total cost of the claim through consistent care and the use of technology.
So I want to talk about that. So I don't even know what the correct next question would be, because I wanted to go into how you got into it, how this got started. So let's table that and talk about how do you do that? So how is it possible to potentially pay caregivers more, which you would think, given what you've heard and seen, that could potentially, you could get a higher quality caregivers for when you're able to pay better, and you're less likely to have other problematic issues. So how do you balance the additional cost for that while also reducing the overall cost?
Yeah. Yeah, we have this paradoxical model that when we were raising investment, it says, hey, I'm going to charge everybody else lower rates, and we're going to pay the helper higher, and we're going to make a ton of money. And they go, well, that basic math doesn't work. Yeah. So the answer there is scale, right? And so what we do is we've been hardwired based on our previous experience, again, being in long-term care as service providers. We believe we're passionate about older adults. We're passionate about care recipients. If I had to guess, though, or wager, we actually are a lot more passionate about the caregivers, because typically they're paid $9 to $10 an hour. They're the fastest growing workforce in the U.S. They do an amazing job, and I think this pandemic is really casting a big necessary spotlight on that. And so for us, we wanted to hard code something into the formation of the company. And that was, can we start paying a living wage? So on average on our platform, could they earn about $15 an hour on average? There's geographical discrepancies, of course. And so for us, we saw the writing on the wall. If we want to think of macroscopic home caregiver forces, where you start to see unionization and a fight for 15, we saw the writing on the wall, and frankly, we thought it was sort of the right thing to do. Yeah. But in order for us to actually make money, we have to be more efficient, and we have to build good technology to handle that. So we operate nationwide. And we are based in Austin, Texas, and we have about 1.5 persons running the matching of caregiver operation in Austin, and the corresponding, if we had an agency, would easily be 4 or 5x that number of staff. And so what we do is pass those savings off to 2 people. That's the helper as well as the insurance carrier.
That kind of nails it. So how did it start? What were you both of you doing before you joined Helper Bees, and where'd the light bulb, when was that light bulb moment that's like, there's a problem and there's an opportunity, I'm going to go ahead and solve it?
So my background, my doctorate is in molecular biophysics. So I researched protein folding, and that had some implications for Alzheimer's disease. My grandmother was diagnosed, though, while I was finishing my research. And so I transitioned out and started founding dementia facilities. So own 2, I'm actually at one now. We're deemed an essential service, so I get to get out of the house. I'm one of the few individuals in the world that can leave my home. But this sparked, that's about over a decade ago, sparked a number of other companies in home health and home care in general. And so the idea was, I owned a home care agency, and we started realizing we were a dispatch service, and we were taking a pretty hefty margin, a 30 to 40% margin, of just taking some staff and connecting them up with a care recipient. And I was taking a great margin for just sitting back and not doing anything. And our co-founder, Eric, actually had the idea, and this was at the sort of start of Uber, where everyone was going to Uberize everything. Uber dog walking, Uber of everything. And so it was actually his idea. But it took me about 2 days to actually understand, like, of course, that's the way we should do it. This is highly personalized care. I'm just a dispatch service. That's all I'm doing, is saying, hey, you go to this home, you go to this home. Instead, if we could remove that intermediate, but allow a framework to exist around like a normal human relationship, which is around personalities and interests, and allow that to flourish, then both parties win. And I can build some tech and take a little piece of that, but much less than I would have.
Christina, what were you doing?
Yeah, so I was in a former life was working in social enterprise and international aid, but actually met Shar and the founding team. I was working at Techstars as their company went through as a portfolio company. And so I think from, what was that, like day 1 of all of you transitioning full time to the Helper Bees? Yeah, so very early on in the company, met them, and just it was a good mission to follow in with. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So for both of you, as I'm hearing the solution, a couple things come to mind, which is if we do that on-demand model, right? do you have situations, because I know of specific circumstances where someone has home health care and they have like the same person coming routinely all the time. Does your system kind of break that a little bit, where you could have different folks coming at different time, or is it, have you evolved it so that that once that relationship is formed between the person that needs the healthcare and the healthcare provider, that they can remain intact?
Yeah, so the norm really in home care agencies is to potentially have a different caregiver every visit. And so when you're dealing with personal care, like personal hygiene care, that's obviously a problem. Some great agencies out there really will match you with the same caregiver, and you get the same caregiver every visit. Definitely not the norm though, and we hear that from our insurance carrier claimants. When we were first taking our solution around, we heard that this is our number one complaint from our claimants. We have nothing we can do about it. They get a different caregiver every time. The caregiver doesn't know anything about them before they walk into the door.
Yeah.
And so what we started with this idea, of course, direct connecting people, and this is what's more efficient, again, which allows for the economics to work, but really getting back to the notion of what do human relationships even look like? And that's our ability to bond and our ability to now actually extend each other grace when it comes to things like scheduling or having to change things around. And so for us, as long as we are providing the seed of a relationship, and we allow both parties now to be active participants in the relationship, and this is really key, that doesn't exist today. A home care agency is just going to send you somebody who they think is best, especially in my example. That's what I was doing. But in ours, we actually put the care recipient or their power of attorney or their family, we allow them to select their own caregiver. So they've got a lot of skin in the game. This is reflective of every other human relationship you have where, I'm invested in it, and that means I'm invested in making it work. And so we see that ownership of the care recipient side actually be really transformative, because now they have been empowered to go in and select and be an active participant in who's delivering that care. And it makes the relationship a lot stickier.
Yeah, and just as an interesting follow-up to that, I mean, granted, the sample size is still a bit small, but tying it back into the carrier benefit, we've actually shown through our data, again, being a technology company, so we've got a lot of things digitized, that having the same caregiver every time, actually, you're going to see a better result, or a more consistent result when it comes to actually reporting back care on that particular customer. Versus when you have a lot of interruptions in the care and the care delivery, you have a bit of like inaccuracy or a discrepancy that's sort of not explained in understanding that person's care journey. And so that's been kind of interesting to be able to look at and analyze. And not only did we have that sort of belief, inherent in Shar's experience, we also now can see it through a data set.
Right.
So that seems like instinctually correct, right? Did you lead into building your technology to try to execute on something like that, or did it kind of holistically happen?
Yeah, this has been the another sort of hard constraint to when we founded the company. We're all the founding team, at least, we're sort of a little nerdy, and so we love math and we love data. And so if we get into a little
protein folding.
And protein folding, that's right. And I did the protein folding with supercomputers. And so like we like crunching data. And if we want to take the business wonky reasons why we founded the company, we love home care. We love home care services, but we also saw that who really cares about this, and that's you follow the money, and the payers really care. So in the US, if we start looking at this baby boomer growth, Medicare doesn't cover this sort of service. So who does it fall to? Well, private insurance or Medicaid. We decided that we knew early on that long-term care insurance, at least the one we were most familiar with, is going to have significant challenges as baby boomers started to start filing claims, frankly. We also saw there's no scalable way to acquire data from the home to actually deliver transformative care. We saw this in a small microcosm here in north of Austin, but we extrapolated that out further. And so we wanted to build as this scalable data acquisition model. And so even if we want to talk about the helper bees, the helpers are going out using our technology, or those that we've matched are like the little bees, and they go and pollinate and they grab pollen, they bring it back to the hive, which is sort of our data analytics engine. And so we've massed this huge data set of how do people age, and it's constantly generating information. And what we can do from this, and what we're doing now, is starting to say, all right, well, now let's analyze this. Let's split up individuals and say, well, these are the interventions that actually work. These are the ones that you should try to remain at home. And we can now be your guided by information and data, as opposed to everybody needs to be aware of falls, or everyone needs an Apple Watch, or everyone needs a medication adherence device, which honestly is the only alternative. There's, other than stratifying each claimant or policyholder by age, there was really nothing else that you could do. And so data has always been a huge driver of why we exist. And so that's where we built our technology from the ground up, knowing that our sort of downstream effect of gathering this data would be ripe.
I think from a knowledge transfer perspective too, I mean, having sort of this power to show carriers on a real-time basis, what's going on, it sort of solidifies to them, okay, this investment in A, digital data, and then B, maybe some analytics on top of it is actually worth it. And so that's been very different, because I mean, they were paper-based, processes for a long time, and you just can't do much from a scale perspective, or even analyze to the level that we can in any, this is truly big data, and there's just no way to do that when it's paper.
Yes. So my day-to-day is in property casualty, and now, I have quite an extensive set of relationships with folks that deal with the life industry, and and I discovered that life was even worse. P&C was bad. Life was even worse. So it's now sound like I'm imagining myself. I'm putting myself in the shoes as an exec of a long-term care company. My instincts probably tell me that they were probably just as bad, if not worse, in terms of a digital infrastructure, being able to actually act and move on data as the life companies were. That it sounds like that's what you found. There was probably a lot of information around, but they just couldn't do anything with it, and they weren't able to take advantage of this new digital data, the big data that Christina was talking about. They weren't able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember who was writing these policies, who was issuing these, and these were big life insurance companies initially in sort of the early 2000s and late 90s. And so, that was one of the biggest surprises, not being in insurance 2 years ago, when we started talking about matching. We're a high-tech company, is realizing they can't ingest any of the data that we're giving to them. And we just assumed that you could. We assumed that everybody wanted this digital data. But we are to this day still, of course, because things change slowly, but we're up against hard constraints of existing either admin systems or systems in general. And so we've had to be really flexible with the way that we do our data analytics, because you can't just flood people with data. That's one of the worst things that you can do. But also we needed to make it so that it was easy to say yes. We're a small and young company, and when it comes to innovation, sometimes it's difficult to adopt when you're a huge, massive life insurance company. And so we allow existing processes, existing admin platforms to exist. We integrate seamlessly within that, but we just pull out one little bit, and we have this data analytics and this reporting that we send to them, our carrier customers, just some interesting reports for them to just analyze their block or analyze specific use cases.
Yeah. So outside of the specific reduction in cost of the expense part, the claim part of the business, it almost seems like with that analytics, as you're learning, as the sample size grows, Christina, and as the big data comes in, and as the technology is able to view the data, create predictive models and other things off of that there's almost like a virtuous cycle where that could feed back to the underwriting part of it.
Yeah. So if you yes, so the idea would be, if I could build a great machine learning algorithm to determine a particular profile, understand their morbidity, and that's what's fascinating about long-term care. Like I'm fascinated with insurance in general. I'm fascinated with the data that long-term care has. They essentially have a massive data set of telling us how we age. The key was just being able to mine it. And so you're absolutely right. The ability from a predictive perspective to keep people at home now, but to transform in a few years how people are writing these policies. Because as you know, like there's been a dramatic decline in number of policies being issued. But I actually think regulators are very concerned with that, because ultimately states are going to be responsible for paying for the 80 million Americans who are going to need this service. And so private insurance needs to open up, but everyone's really gun shy, because of course you are, given just the beating that most of these carriers have taken. But if you were to now do it armed with a tremendous amount of predictive data, how would you reimagine the long-term care policy? And I think that will have we could have a pretty big role in that here in a couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the silver lining, so to speak, on the infrastructure not being in place is that, we get to be sort of partners alongside as carriers are thinking about what this transformation is mean and what's it going to mean to them. And, we've got a couple different sort of, products or projects that we're working on now. And a couple carriers are quite innovative, where we're actually doing something with this sort of care data and filtering it into more of a true sort of care management style. And I think from that, being able to sort of use on claim data anyway, determining claimant profiles and behaviors and things like that, that's a really good sort of stepping stone and precedent to say, okay, can we take this earlier in the process and then key that back into underwriting?
Yeah. To me, it just seems like a very underrated part of a lot of the technology that's coming into insurance. But as you mentioned, as both of you have mentioned, that from a society standpoint, like we're at a point where if we can't find proper private solutions, the public's going to end up picking up the costs, and we run into more problems because it's likely the costs will get out of control. Makes the problems we deal with in insurance look small, but the bureaucracy in a lot of the public institutions are just really difficult to overcome. And so, I'm curious as to whether you realized this early on, that this was more than just a business customer type of solution, that the impacts, there's a third leg to the stool, and that there's a societal victory to this as well, if you nail this.
Yeah, so we were aware of that early on, but it's very different from where it exists now today. Our goal early was to, and this is just anecdotal evidence that again we wanted to scale, was we had started introducing people who were quite literally on the same block who needed care. They could just walk over and provide care. And one of our biggest goals was to pull people in who had never done senior care before.
Okay.
The me 10 years ago, I was just a scientist, and I never thought I would be here. I never thought I would be in the facility. And I think it's just, I knew that when we described what we did, so many people were like, I really want to do that. And so the idea was just being able to open that up. So our notion was multiple little hives and neighborhoods, but that started morphing into this idea around a societal good, because we're all on the hook for this, meaning we're either from a financial perspective, or we're 1 degree of separation of knowing somebody who's suffering from this. And when you'll start to see the ripples effect of poor care, it'll affect me at my job. If I have to care for my mother, I have to go and manage that sort of care, or my father. All these sorts of issues start to have these dramatic rippling effects. And when you look at the census data, when this part of that curve that we're entering, it's going to be everybody. Everyone's going to be affected by this. And I think at that point, it's almost too late for innovation to occur really quickly. Yeah. And so that's why we thought it was the right time for our solution to step in. And that's why we focused on private insurance, is because I think we've written a little bit about this, but I think the next innovation is going to come in from long-term care, because they have the problem right now. They don't have the problem like Medicaid or states will, which in 3, 4, 5, 8 years. And so they're innovating really quickly, but I think this is a great greenhouse to apply this to such a larger model when it comes to sort of state and federal level.
Christina, I'm curious your view on when you first started, if you sort of had an inclination that this would have like a much bigger impact than just a business opportunity.
Yeah, no, I'll be really honest. No, I didn't. I mean, part of it is, being in the thick of it, in the weeds, solutioning with these carriers, sort of their current daily problem, so to speak. You're really deep down into it, but you know, zooming out and having the ability, just even talking with you today, you know, to sit here and think about, okay, where, you know, where is the bigger impact? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's election year, right? So there's also a lot of things top of mind related to healthcare and everything, rising health insurance costs and things like that. So it becomes very topical. And so weaving this conversation into, you know, the bigger picture between even how I'm personally impacted by, you know, aging costs to our society. And I think that's where this whole story becomes a lot more interesting, and being able to be mindful of sort of the direction that we help influence.
Yeah. And it also becomes more interesting because we're in the middle of a pandemic. So from what I understand, the disease is really aggressive for those that go that course, where there's a requirement of ventilators and a lot of hospital care. Are you finding that there's a home health part of this pandemic?
Yeah, so it was interesting. We published an article just on Medium, just on some of our data. And we took a different approach. So a lot of people talk about older adults and their susceptibility and their vulnerability, but we wanted to see what were the people who are living at home and using home caregivers, how are they adapting to it? And what we found was a number of really interesting trends. One is they were staying home, which is great. And I think the media coverage was really effective early on, where and we could tell this because we can tell when visits were a caregiver was leaving the home with the care recipient just dropped off. You could just see early March, churning along, and then boom, drop off. But then we started seeing helpers are leaving the home more alone. And where are they going? And so we started realizing that they were going out for more errand running. So they were doing the grocery shopping. They weren't taking the older adult with them, and they were going out and procuring supplies for the individual, which is great, right? Because helps stop the spread of the disease. Older adults are, again, more vulnerable, so they were staying home. The problem, though, is when we also started looking at medical visits just tanked. And so what that means is that a lot of older adults aren't leaving for the routine medical care. They're not going out of the home, either because doctors aren't seeing them. Our hope, and we couldn't find this in the data, is that telemedicine, which really did open up, ideally was being opened up for this population, and they were utilizing it. But what we're starting to see is that care was actually pretty flat during this period of time. So it means if you had an existing caregiver, they were using it a little bit, the same frequency, like 5 times a week. They increased a little bit by about 10% in the hours that they were using, so just a little bit longer. But really what's concerning to me is that lack of routine care for chronic conditions. If this extends, I think we might actually see sort of a downhill effect on either morbidity or mortality.
Yeah. So you're essentially saying because they're not doing their routine medical visits, that could manifest itself to negative health consequences or outcomes that wouldn't have necessarily occurred if they had just kept up the routine.
That's right. And we, this big asterisk here, we're still analyzing the data. It's still very early. Give us another week, or sort of weekly and monthly, we're crunching it. And we want to see if these trends continue. But again, anecdotally, when we're starting to talk to individuals, people aren't picking up medications, they're not getting refills, physicians aren't seeing you if you're ill. Those sorts of things are a big challenge. So.
Yeah. Have you learned anything from this?
We actually are busier than we've ever been. There's another product that we have, so a lot of the matching gets that hallmark, but we have a whole other side of our business, which is called skilled services. And so what that means is we have registered nurses that typically go out to the home on behalf of large insurance companies. So it could be workers' comp, disability, or long-term care. And we do home assessments. So we go to your home, we look at your kitchen, your bathroom, we ask you to move around, and we're assessing. We're assessing for what's called benefit eligibility or just general wellness. As you can tell, nobody really wants a person to come into the home to do this assessment. So we launch virtual assessments much like this, and we've got a little bit of technology wrapped around it, and have just started seeing just this dramatic increase in demand for carriers. Christina alluded to this earlier. We're seeing sales cycle. This is fast-tracked by 2 years. for us. We're seeing people who usually take 6 months for procurement take 1 month. But what's interesting, what's really surprising to me is that this is just completely knocking down barriers. Before we kept hearing, well, is older adult going to use the technology? Now the response on both sides is, well, they sort of have to, right? They have to embrace this. And what's exciting is you're starting to see great grandparents and grandparents around the US starting to use Zoom and buying tablets, and you start to see that people are interacting with tech in a different way. This is really good for them, I think, but it's also good for us. And so that we don't ever have to expose any individual to a nurse even coming into the home, or we can do more frequent assessments, right? And so perhaps you just want to talk about your care. I don't have to schedule a person, find them, and get them to where you're at. You can log on and talk. So it's not necessarily telemedicine, but it's sort of like tele-aging in place. Like, how do you want to talk to somebody? Show me your bathroom, right?
Yeah.
To your,
that's what's exciting.
Yeah, Nick, to your comment earlier on sort of the societal impact, I think what's really interesting now too is carriers they're thinking about it in this crisis mode, but they're also saying, hey, you know what, if this actually is a good solution, I wonder how we can continue to use this model beyond the crisis. And so I think what will be interesting to see is how carriers adapted not only now, but for the future now, and how they're using virtual solutions as part of a way to better reach their customer base, and better make services accessible and their benefits accessible to them when an in-person is not an option. And so this is interesting because we've actually now, I think, positively influenced the way that carriers are open to using technology, and maybe reducing some of that initial legality or security obstacles that may have previously exist.
Yeah, and that might actually be a silver lining to lots of things that have occurred.
That's right.
It's almost like a 2x4 to the head that things sort of had to change. And what's interesting is, like with telemedicine, like the technology has been here for a long time to be able to execute on something like that, and we've sort of struggled to get any traction because there wasn't any impetus to do that, and now we have it.
That's right. Yeah, Eric Schmidt, one of the founders of Google, talks about this a lot, about how the digital infrastructure was a necessity to adapt to things like the pandemic. And so taking sort of the thesis of that idea is we're in a pressure cooker or an Instapot of innovation, right? In the sense of, if a carrier's claims organization was all digital, they could have juked very quickly on certain ways, and you could start to change the way that you do accept data. You can be agnostic to the data source. And I think that's what I'm really excited about, people realizing that we could have been a lot more nimble if our infrastructure was nimble. And the pandemic had to have happened, but it could be anything. It could be this new awesome technology that came out that's going to absolutely transform the world. And can I ingest that, and can I use that? And so we're lucky enough to be able to, on the front lines of this, talking to innovative carriers, because these assessments also, we've digitized them. They're no longer on paper. So we've taken a 40-page paper application, turned into digital data, and we're crunching the numbers and analyzing it. So your question about underwriting, well, that was claims-based data. Imagine you had 40 pages to confer eligibility before they ever went on claim. Most carriers would take this data and they house it, right? It's on paper. There's no way to manipulate it. Imagine if I have 40 pages of claimant information, couple that with policyholder, when you first bought, and then now I have claims data for 4 years. The wealth of information to stitch these together is dramatic. And luckily, going digital is really a buzzword, but it's starting to trickle down the claims organization, and they can see that value downstream. This feedback loop that you alluded to will continue.
Yeah. How large is the long-term care market in rough gross premium?
So I think in terms of claims, so that tells you where we're at, but I think we're at, there's 7 million policies outstanding right now, sort of combined in the marketplace. I think annually, I might get this wrong, but there's anywhere between 40 and 70,000 policies that are being sold. They look very different from when you might have sold them with the standalone policies. A lot of these are hybrid policies. But from a claims perspective, I think 2020, they're expected industry-wide to be about $19 to $20 billion in claims costs.
Okay, so in order to support something like that, it'd have to be a factor of 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 above that in order
Yeah,
just to support that.
hmm
So
yeah,
it's good size.
it's a good size, but also
Yeah.
we have to think about rate. So a nerdy physicist in me, I think a lot about maximum velocity, which is that 20 billion number. But if you have to think about acceleration, we got to that number. It doubled in like 3 to 4 years, and so that's
Yeah.
how fast it's growing, right? It's
Yeah.
not been sort of flat. It's been like this, and then it's going to keep going like that. And so that's where you'll start to see innovation occur.
Yeah, that's wild. I only have a couple more questions. I'm curious as to the workers' comp, because now that you're talking, I just keep thinking that workers' comp has this problem, and it has had this problem for a long time. Especially carriers' desire to get somebody back to work, but their
That's right.
inability to have enough influence on the healthcare to do that, especially with concurrent diseases, like someone who has diabetes who gets injured on the job has a multitude of additional problems that occur, and to get them back to work is a Herculean challenge. So how are you trying to tackle the workers' comp element, and what's different between the comp element, the disability element, and potentially the long-term care element that an insurance professional that's not in those fields may not give consideration to?
Yeah, I think, at least to speak to the comp side of things, one of the what we see in our early understanding and conversations and now contracts with carriers are, there is not a lot of distinction between home health care, which are really delivered by like registered nurse or physical therapist, and then home companion care, which is errand running, grocery shopping, helping you in the restroom. That last bit, I do think there needs to be a distinction between the two of these because they serve very, very different purposes. Not everyone needs a 24/7 registered nurse or medical care, right? But in large part, this is treated sort of as a bulk home health care services. And our idea is to, no, let's separate them because you have each is a separate tool. And so if we think about from the companion side or the home care side, having a conduit of information back as to how to better deliver the care and give that caregiver sort of the tools to do that job. So in your idea where you have sort of diabetes as well as a worker's an occupational accident, how do we manage that? How do we give the caregiver the tools to do that job and help care for them? But how does the insurance company know, like, hey, I need to bring more to bear? And that's what's really fascinating about workers' comp is they're very active in wanting to get somebody back to work.
Yeah.
But it almost seems like they're fighting with one arm behind their back when it comes to home care claims that go back to their home. And we hear this a lot from carriers where they say, we haven't really talked to the claimant. We haven't verified anything.
Yep.
We get visit notes back by paper. And if we read the visit notes, they could say, we might find it a month later if we read them that says tremendous depression, that sort of thing. And then what if you could get flagged immediately? What if a bat signal could go up and somebody could immediately come in and come in and help them? That's what we're offering. We're offering the ability to step in and transform somebody's lives by saying, hey, we've got the answer. So across insurance products, what we're trying to do is say, let's combine this knowledge base of home care and say, well, we know in general what somebody needs when it comes to sort of these sort of comorbidities or these sort of situations, and identify those risky individuals or those people who frankly need that care. And we use that through technology. Also in workers' comp, we do catastrophic claims. So those really look like our long-term care claims. These are those who on service for 20 to 30 years. These are massive injuries, so spinal cord injuries, brain trauma, and it's really difficult managing that level of care. And that's where the most closely parallels our long-term care experience is managing chronic conditions that just aren't going to get better.
Yeah, I mean, there's of course differences just from how the policies are regulated and what's stipulated in terms of an actual benefit and how that's all paid out. But again, I think the benefit of sort of what we've been doing is that with the infrastructure and sort of our nimbleness, those sort of nuanced changes that need to be made can be made. And it's just really about opening up sort of the carrier's eyes, so to speak, to what they can do with their data and how that informs sort of the decision making that they take, regardless if it's a comp claim or if it's a DI claim or if it's a long-term care claim.
Right. Did either of you ever in your wildest dreams think you'd be insurance nerds?
No. I have this whole story. I went to InsurTech Connect, I think it was in Vegas, and Christina and I, like, nobody knew who we were. We cold emailed people, LinkedIn, one of the largest insurance carriers on the planet. We were responding to a proposal and we didn't know what a TPA meant. We asked them what it was. It's really stupid because we Googled it and the acronym is all over the place. So I get to InsurTech Connect, and Christina and I have like thought a lot about the conference and who we should talk to. But I get in the cab and the guy's talking to me and he's like, "What are you here for?" And I said, "An insurance conference." And I stopped and I'm like, I don't sell insurance. Build technology, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, it's pretty fascinating. We would have never thought we would have been in it. But as deeper you go, you see that it's highly complex, which I like. But the opportunity is so unique that you control the purse strings, which means you have so much ability to massively change the way people really receive care. And so selfishly for us, we want to be a part of that. We want to be a part of those really smart, well-meaning individuals who say, I can actually make things happen, and we just need somebody to go and do it. And, hopefully that's us.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I think sometimes when I wake up in the morning, I shake my head a little bit at the amount of knowledge I've now accumulated on long-term care policy differentiation and claims processing and TPA administration and all of these things. And I'm like, what am I ever going to do with this knowledge later on? But it's been useful now.
Yeah, well, you're benefiting society, so that's I'm thrilled that you came on and had this discussion with me, because I got a primer on long-term care, but I can see the vision of what you're trying to do, and it always interests me when I see something that like immediately registers as beyond just the traditional customer company dynamic. When there's that third leg of the stool, when society benefits from the solution that you're providing, it's just thrilling, because it's, I'm an insurance professional, and we have a bad reputation or stereotype that's out in the marketplace, and this type of thing changes that. This is solutions in a particular space that has a bad stereotype that's actually going to ultimately benefit society. And no one really gives credence to our ability within this industry to come up with these sort of solutions. And so hats off to both of you. Like it's just thrilling to see something that's just so positive.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, long-term care is really good. It's a lot of negative press, and I think it's really on the financial side of things. But I mean, the people we work with, the carriers we work with, the carriers that we even talk to that we're not yet working with, are phenomenal individuals. And I think they understand exactly that charge that you're talking about. And there's a little bit of frustration of them wanting to go in and change the world, and they believe that they have that ability to.
Yeah.
And what's exciting about the solutions that either we provide or that we're helping connect is there's no nefarious purpose. It's, I want you to keep you at home, and I want you to be healthy. Who can doubt that mission? Sure, there might be a financial savings downstream, but almost who cares about that? It's we're going to help you either get better or find you the resources to maintain the quality of life that you want. And I think that's a really, really exciting mission. And a lot of our carrier claims organizations are excited when we come into the room, because they get to align that. They find that conduit now to align sort of those goals with digital claims processing, which is really wonky and everything, but we sort of are able to thread that needle and say, oh, this is actually how downstream is translating to something transformative for your policyholders.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason, honestly, that the carriers enjoy working with us, is just not being in insurance before. We don't have any sort of preset sort of mindset on how to necessarily do things, and even the lingo and language that we use. And I think that translates into our actual services and our customer service, because we came at it from a consumer driven approach. And so in our conversations with their claimants, I mean, it's just a very different conversation. We're not necessarily following a script that they've been using for years. This is something new and novel, and it just comes across in the way that we communicate out every.
Yeah, agreed.
We lost an internet connection. That's okay. We get it, Christina. You're back. Let's end with those positive words. Again, hats off. Thank you for coming into the industry and making such a big splash.
Thank you.
Yeah, for everyone that's watching, keep being safe, wash your hands, and be kind and subscribe. I appreciate it. Until next time.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.